With me to dig deeper, MSNBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian. Norm Eisen was White House ethics czar under President Obama and is also the founder and executive chair of the Democracy Defenders Fund. Barbara McQuade served as U.S. Attorney for Michigan's Eastern District and is an MSNBC legal analyst. Stuart Stevens was Mitt Romney's chief strategist in 2012, is now a senior advisor at the Lincoln Project. Thanks to all of you. So, Norm, the president says it's his decision. I mean, the situation is unique, but it's not unusual for people to file claims against the administration. I mean, typically as a precursor to a lawsuit. But can Donald Trump do just that? Just make the decision by himself?
No, Chris, that's not how it works. First of all, these decisions have to be approved by DOJ. Ethics rules apply to DOJ, where when you have Pam Bondi or Todd Blanche, the senior officials who would have to approve this, who were formerly Donald Trump's lawyers, they have to recuse themselves. That's the first guardrail. If they continue to have personal legal entanglements and they're actually advocating for Donald Trump against the United States government, those ethics rules can rise to the level of criminal restrictions that can be violated. And then, Chris, there's the little thing known as the United States Constitution. Donald Trump is not supposed to be able to reach across the counter and grab the government's money and put it in his own pocket. It's called the Emoluments Clause, applies in the foreign context, also to domestic money. So there are multiple rules that are being threatened here. And at Democracy Defenders Fund, we have over 200 cases and matters against Donald Trump. If he tries this, it'll be 201.
So you raised so many questions with what you just said, but let me ask you specifically about saying that Todd Blanche or Pam Bondi would have to recuse themselves. If they didn't, then what? Who would take action against them?
Chris, when we've seen behavior from others that raise issues of illegality, there are places where you can file those complaints. So if Todd Blanche and Pam Bondi break the ethical rules, you can go to the state bars of which they're a member, the Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General, the Office of Professional Responsibility. These are not small duties, and it could also be the subject of a larger piece of litigation if this heist of $230 million actually happens. There are multiple avenues. And then, of course, there's congressional oversight as well.
All right. So, Ken, let's back up for a minute and lay out exactly what the president is saying about why he thinks he's owed nearly $250 million of taxpayer money.
Chris, I've been talking to current and former DOJ officials about this and looking at the relevant laws and regulations. So first of all, these claims go back to the Biden administration. There's one about the Russia investigation where Donald Trump claims that his rights were violated because of that investigation. And there's a separate one about the Mar-a-Lago search of his property and that investigation into his mishandling of classified documents, where he says his rights and privacy were violated in that case. The important thing to know is that both of those cases were exhaustively looked at by independent fact finders. In the Mueller case, a special counsel, and there was nothing of the kind found. There was no finding that Donald Trump's rights were violated or that anything inappropriate was done in those cases. And in fact, in the Mar-a-Lago case, the judge, Eileen Cannon, who made some very controversial rulings in Donald Trump's favor, nonetheless upheld the legality of that search and rejected Donald Trump's claims that the search was illegal or his rights were violated or the FBI acted improperly. So that's number one. If the Justice Department makes a finding that Donald Trump's rights were violated, that would be a great injury to the facts. And then the second question is, who approves this? There's nothing in the law or regulation that calls for the president to be involved in this in any way. As Norm said, the law says that the Justice Department, and particularly the Deputy Attorney General, has to rule on claims of over $1 million. And there's a whole process involved in this. Look, I've talked to the Justice Department, and they say they will comply with the ethical rules, but the question is, if Todd Blanche recuses himself, does that matter in the end? Because we're living in a world where everyone who works at the Justice Department, particularly the political appointees, know that they defy Donald Trump's wishes at their peril. People are being fired every day in the Justice Department and the FBI. So Donald Trump's made pretty clear what he wants to happen here. And the question is, will that happen? And will we ever learn about it? Because that's the other question. They don't have to announce when they make this settlement. It could have already happened for all we know. And the only way we'll find out about it is through good reporting and perhaps the Freedom of Information Act, Chris.
Yeah, Barbara, I mean, he thinks it's pretty simple. Donald Trump does. He says he was greatly damaged, and presumably he could say, here are my receipts that, I paid my lawyers to prove that this cost me money. But to Ken's point, might we not even ever know about it? What do you see happening here?
So it's a possibility legally, but I think what is part of motivating this conduct is Donald Trump's continuous efforts to rewrite history. This is yet one more example of a way of saying he was wronged. He is seeking compensation for malicious prosecution. He alleges that it was all just made up when he was investigated for retaining classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago home, or he was interfering with an election, or he was having connections with Russia, that there was no basis for bringing those claims. Of course, as we've heard, they were fully investigated. There was probable cause finding by a judge and by a grand jury for all of those things. And so what it seems to me that Trump is trying to do is to remedy his reputation. One of the things he said publicly is, I won't keep the money, I'm going to give it to charity. But he wants to have this clean slate. He wants a finding by the Justice Department that he did no wrong, and in fact, he was the victim. I think it is part and parcel with the pardoning of the January 6th defendants. I think it is all part of the same scheme that caused him to issue the executive order about the weaponization of the Justice Department during the Biden administration, and his efforts to seek payback against Jim Comey and Letitia James. It's an effort to rewrite history, that he's the victim here, and that there was this great conspiracy against him to keep him out of office.
Well, I think, Stuart, we should say a couple of things if he wants to rewrite history about his charitable endeavors. David Fahrenthold did incredible work, investigative reporting, so much so that he won a Pulitzer Prize on Trump's longtime habit of not following through on promises to donate money. And his own foundation, as you will remember, had to shut down for misusing charitable funds. So what's the average American going to make of this?
Yeah, look, from the very beginning, the Trump campaign going back to 2015 was a large criminal enterprise, and it's only grown. He's the only president that his campaign manager, his deputy campaign manager, his lawyer, his political consultant, his foreign policy advisor, they all were convicted of felonies. And if you worked in politics, you could see the way that they were setting this up. And it was taking over the RNC, diverting all this money to the Trump family. This is just an extension of this. And this is what the Republican Party has allowed to happen. If you had Tony Soprano as president, you have to ask yourself, what would Tony be doing as differently? He'd probably be more worried about his image than Trump. So look, this is just one more egregious criminal act. And I think the question we have to start asking ourselves is, when this Trump period has passed, which it will, what is the structure that we are going to be able to erect to hold these people accountable? It goes from the illegal ICE agents to what Stephen Miller is doing. There is a huge amount to what Doge did of illegality. And it would be a terrible sign if we just looked the other way and moved on.
I want to play for you, Norm, something that the president said a week ago, because when he was asked about it, frankly, he even seemed to admit it didn't look good. Take a listen.
I have a lawsuit that was doing very well. And when I became president, I said, I'm sort of suing myself. I don't know. How do you settle the lawsuit? I'll say, give me X dollars, right? And I don't know what to do with the lawsuit. It's a great lawsuit. And now I won. It sort of looks bad. I'm suing myself, right? So I don't know.
If you're someone who works, not just in the White House, but in the federal government in something related to ethics, I mean, what are you even thinking today? Did you ever envision this kind of situation?
Chris, I wouldn't even let Barack Obama refinance his small family home in Chicago because we were in the middle of the Great Recession and he was regulating the banks. Nobody's ever seen the kind of profit-grabbing exploitation of the presidency, by some estimates approaching $2 billion of Donald Trump profiting off the presidency. But and that includes his crypto interests, for example, where he's getting huge sums through those business enterprises that hit his pockets from Gulf nations where we have strong interests. But here, when he's preparing to grab, might be grabbing $230 million from the American taxpayer, there's a constitutional barrier to that. You're not allowed to do it. It's called the Emoluments Clause. A president cannot seize that kind of money to benefit himself. Donald Trump just admitted it. What he just said, that he's suing himself, will be Exhibit A in the lawsuit. We sued over emoluments in the first Trump administration. We won case after case. It was at the United States Supreme Court. It was mooted. Donald Trump left office. But if he breaks the law, he will be held accountable, and so will those who are enabling this behavior. You have a 34 times convicted felon in connection with campaign finance violations in that 2016 campaign. Stewart talked about that pattern of criminality, campaign finance violations and cover-ups. What do you expect? If he does it, there will be legal accountability.